So, Jacintha, I just want to say welcome and thank you so much for being here. For whoever will be listening to us and who has yet to make your acquaintance, I just want to make clear what it is that I know about you. So,
Do it, do it.
yes. So, for the people who have yet to meet this wonderful woman, what I know about Jacinta is that she is a woman who strives to serve and to help women, who helps create and bring more life onto this planet. She's a woman who is the top of the field, fertility expert, and she's an insanely well educated naturopath with a ton of experience. The way that she came into my life is because I actually reached out to the fertility clinic called the Jocelyn Center in Australia, which is an amazing center. And I actually found this because of a book with, I don't know if you know about her, but there's this woman called Claudia Welsh, and she wrote this book called Balance Your Hormones, Balance Your Life. I read that like 10 years ago, and that was actually what spiraled me into my journey of, educating myself within holistic health and for women. But in that book, she spoke about how to create a cycle that's really healthy and how important that is, but also very much about the damage of birth control pills and things like this. So it's very natural, or that she very much suggested that you find a natural contraceptive. So this is actually why I reached out to you, and I'm so grateful that I reached out to that clinic and I found you there. Another thing I know about you is that you are so lovely and so natural in your way of being. I'm sure that everybody, when they're going to listen to this, they'll experience this too. But you're just so natural and so knowledgeable and so kind and nurturing in the way that you are.
Oh
Like,
my.
seriously, the way that you've supported me, especially in this year earlier on when I had some high level stress going on and we were working on balancing and stabilizing my cycle, you just gently guided and reminded me in terms of, well, the kind of relationship that you have with your body and with your cycle, that's for you. That has nothing to do with whether or not you're ready to conceive, whether or not you're in a relationship, wherever you are in your life, to all kinds of other people. Having a nurtured, healthy cycle is part of looking after yourself. So, especially in a time of stress, be very gentle with yourself, but also make sure that this is when you prioritize taking the measures that your body needs you to take, especially during stress. That was just such a important reminder for me. But your whole way of being, whenever you speak with you, and now after like a year, like my cycle has never been better. It's never been healthier. My blood is beautiful. I
Oh,
never
that's
thought I was going to say
fantastic.
that. Yeah,
But
yeah,
it's really nice to hear you remind me of what I said to you, which is our menstrual cycle is fast, and our menstrual cycle does exist to keep us healthy. The hormones that we're secreting in our cycle, that estrogen and that progesterone, are to keep us well and balanced and happy, and to build our bones and our muscles and look after our heart and calm our nervous system down. I mean, it's brilliant that we can harness our menstrual cycle, and biologically the reason it's there is to have a baby. But that's not the only benefit of having a regular menstrual cycle and looking after your periods. And I feel really lucky to say I love getting my periods. Like I love it. I love my day one. I love looking down and seeing, what, without me thinking about it, and I'm a massive overthinker, my body is doing exactly what it's meant to do. It's a reminder to me that, like, my body's totally got this. It's nailing this. To have a regular period is a really good report card that your body is doing what it's meant to be doing.
Yeah. I feel like that kind of is leading into the first question that I have for you, actually, which is, can you speak to what a healthy cycle is? and also actually elaborate on what you're saying in terms of the importance of our bleed for the body.
Yeah. So a healthy menstrual cycle is going to look different for every single woman.
Yeah.
I know that we all read about Little Miss textbook 28-day cycle who ovulates on day 14, but that's not necessarily typical. And each of us will have a different presentation of a unique and individual menstrual cycle. So there are women who will have a regular 35-day cycle who will never ovulate on day 14, but that doesn't make her cycle any less perfect and healthy. So with a healthy menstrual cycle, you're really looking at breaking it down into how long your menstrual cycle is. So the length of the cycle, the bleed itself, whether you're experiencing any pain, whether you're noticing your cervical mucus or your vaginal discharge change, and what you're noticing in terms of premenstrual symptoms. So those are sort of the hallmarks that I'd be talking to you about when trying to ascertain how healthy your menstrual cycle is.
Mm-hmm.
So with regard to our menstrual cycle length, it's determined by two phases essentially of our menstrual cycle. The first phase, our pre-ovulation phase, is our follicular phase, and the second half of our cycle is our post-ovulation phase or our luteal phase. So the length of our menstrual cycle is determined by the length of these two phases, and sandwiched right smack bang in the middle is ovulation, which is like the big party of the whole event. Now, in our pre-ovulation phase, in our follicular phase, this begins on the first day of our menstrual cycle, the first day of that full flow bleeding. And biologically, what's happening in this part of the cycle is we've got a number of follicles that each house an egg that are going to start ripening in our ovaries. So this part of the menstrual cycle is all about our body preparing for ovulation, preparing potentially for a conception. And the key hormone in this part of the menstrual cycle is estrogen. So under the influence of estrogen, we're going to see these follicles start to mature. We're going to see the lining that we've lost during our menstrual bleed start to rebuild and thicken. And we're going to see our cervical mucus start to change and become more profuse and fertile leading up to ovulation. So estrogen is a really important hormone for our cognition and our focus, for our bones and our muscles. It provides us with a great deal of energy. So estrogen is a really important hormone. And it's functioning in this first half of the menstrual cycle to prepare us for ovulation. So that first half of the cycle, maybe it's 14 days for you, maybe it's 10 days, maybe it's 21 days. This half of the menstrual cycle is the most vulnerable to change. So Mai, you and I have chatted before about how stress might throw out your menstrual cycle, or how an infection might throw out your menstrual cycle. It's this phase of your menstrual cycle that's the most vulnerable to change, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we've got our pre-ovulation phase that might last anywhere from 10 to 21 days. And at the end of that follicular phase, that pre-ovulation phase, we have ovulation. So those follicles that were all maturing and getting ready, one of them becomes the lead follicle, the dominant follicle, the ripest, the juiciest, the biggest follicle. And that's the one that gets ovulated. And ovulation is a single moment in time. It is just one moment where that egg is released from that follicle. Done. Ovulation's over. One magical moment. And it sort of is special. The egg is the biggest cell in the human body. And I still can't get over that. And sperm is the smallest cell, believe it or not. So it is this beautiful marriage of opposites in some respects. But ovulation occurs, this magical egg gets released, and we move into our post-ovulation phase. And our post-ovulation phase is actually called our luteal phase. So if you can imagine that big, ripe, juicy follicle on your ovary that had the egg in it, once that egg is ovulated, we're left with an empty space here, this hole, for want of a better word. That actually becomes called the corpus luteum at this point, and that starts to secrete progesterone, which is the other really important hormone for our menstrual cycles. The luteal phase is named after this corpus luteum. And the luteal phase is actually very consistent for each woman. For every woman, you will have your unique luteal phase. It might be a 10-day luteal phase, a 12-day luteal phase, a 17-day luteal phase. That is going to be your pattern. And it's relatively unchanging. That's really individual to you. Anything less than a 10-day luteal phase is considered a luteal phase defect. And what that means is that corpus luteum isn't quite secreting enough progesterone to maintain the second half of your menstrual cycle, which is actually really important for pregnancy. And if we break that hormone word down, progesterone, it is literally progestation. Progesterone is such an important hormone for baby making, for that early pregnancy, but it does go well beyond baby making. Like I was saying to you earlier, progesterone calms down our nervous system. It promotes good sleep. It reduces inflammation. There are benefits to progesterone and to cycling naturally beyond making babies. And so then progesterone drops off if we haven't had a conception and we get a period. So that's our menstrual cycle. Day 1 of bleeding to day 1 of the next bleed. And that's actually a really important thing to remember, Mai, is sometimes when I'm in consult, I'll say to a woman, how long is your menstrual cycle? And she'll say to me, 5 days. Now, what she means is that she's bleeding for 5 days. But what I want to know is how long is her cycle from day 1 of period right through to day 1 of the next period.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It completely makes sense. Now, I'm just wondering, since everything is so individual, obviously you're listing out here some things that are, you know, this is the cycle and stuff. But as an individual woman, if you want to see, do I actually have a healthy cycle? Because obviously all of this is going on the inside, right?
Yeah.
So what kind of signals can we look at? So I know that in my case, I was like, okay, like everything, like it never comes on time, where I was like, sometimes it skips the whole period. I looked at my blood, which is also something that we never talked about. It's like, well, how, like, what's the color of our blood, what's the texture and stuff. And I was like, I mean, this isn't my blood like that, isn't this if I cut my finger? And I was like, I think I need to look at this. So there were certain indicators and things that I chose to look at. But if you just want to kind of check yourself and be aware that, okay, well, it is individual. I can't say that it's 28 days, maybe it's 32, but are there things that a woman can look at and be like, okay, well, I think I'm good?
Yeah, definitely. So, and you're right. So everything that we outlined before is happening inside. We can't see it, but our body is always signaling to us that things are working or not working in quite the right way. Now, one of those ways that you've mentioned is the bleed itself. And like I love talking about periods so much.
You do.
So I just love it.
This
so
is why we're here.
I know. I'm always going to ask the woman, how many days are you bleeding for? What does it look like? You know, is it particularly clotty? These are things that you can see, an individual woman can see each and every month. So in an ideal, healthy menstrual cycle, you would be bleeding for 2 to 7 days. That would be your period. The period wouldn't be too heavy. It wouldn't be too clotty. And you wouldn't be bleeding outside of menstruation, outside of your periods. So cycle day 1, that first day of your menstrual cycle, begins on the first day of that full flow bleeding. So that's really important to remember when you're learning and beginning to chart your menstrual cycle and to pay attention to your menstrual cycle. Don't think that day 1 is that little bit of spotting that you might get before the full flow. Day 1 begins that first day of the full flow bleeding, where you need to pull out a pad or a tampon or a menstrual cup. You know, that's day 1. And ideally, our bleed on day 1 would be bright red. Ideally, it's going, and if it doesn't start out bright, we sort of want it to brighten up by the end of the day. We're expecting a bright color. If the menstrual bleed is brown or black, which some women do notice, then that might mean that your menstrual flow is a little bit stagnant. That's what I would be thinking, that there's some stagnation there. So that might mean that the menstrual flow is a little bit slow to come down, or in fact that the uterine muscle, because your uterus is a muscle, doesn't have enough tone to sort of expel that blood. So if it's sitting there, it's starting to oxidize and turn brown. That's why it does look like old blood. So ideally, when the fresh is blood, it means it's flowing in a nice pattern. The uterine muscle is expelling it efficiently and effectively. But another thing to remember about the color of the menstrual bleed is that it might actually reflect the position of your uterus, which is something that we don't often think about. And definitely in all of the anatomy and physiology training I did to become a naturopath, we didn't once talk about the position of our uterus. But there's a lot going on in our pelvic bowl, and we've got our pubic bone, our bladder, our uterus, and our bowel. And our uterus is generally in a relatively upright position. But sometimes she's tilted forward and flexed forward, and sometimes she's tilted backwards and flexed backwards. Now, if structure affects function, you can imagine that if that uterus, if your womb is quite tilted forward or quite tilted backwards, then that muscle has got a bit of a harder job to sort of bring that down to the cervix and then out through the vagina. So it might be taking a little bit longer to bleed, which means you might be experiencing a brown flow. So your menstrual color is one thing you can pay attention to. Another thing would be obviously the menstrual flow itself and how heavy or how light the period is. And that's something that only we have our own subjective idea about. What one woman might think is heavy might be very light to another woman. But ideally in your periods, you would be able to get through 3 or 4 hours without having to change the right absorbency pad or tampon, or you'd be able to get through most of your heaviest day or with 1 cup. You know, so ideally that's a decent manageable flow for a heavy day. If on your heavy days you are having to change a pad or a tampon every hour or every 2 hours, that's a heavy bleed. I would definitely be considering that that's a heavy flow. And also if you're having to change a pad at night. So, you know, at night we're lying down, we don't have to battle against gravity. Our flow really slows down, and sometimes, you know, you stand up in the morning, you can sort of feel it come out a little bit. But if that's not you, and instead if you're bleeding through those huge overnight pads and you're having to change, that would indicate that you've got a heavy flow. So these are signs that you can determine for yourself whether or not your period is particularly healthy. They're things you can mention to your healthcare practitioner, and they might indicate, as I was saying before, maybe sort of a stagnation with the menstrual flow, or maybe your uterine position, maybe an underlying hormonal imbalance is contributing to a heavier bleed, or your nutritional status, maybe underlying health conditions, maybe your exposure to environmental sort of endocrine disruptors. There are lots of different reasons why you might have a heavier or a lighter bleed, but it's a sign that you can easily observe. And the other thing, tell me.
Yeah. I'm just wondering how many times, because I think sometimes you'll have 1 month where there's, you know, some kind of abnormality. How long would you say that you need to observe these things for it to be like, okay, I need to have this go and checked?
That's such a good question, actually, because you're right. We all get a weird freaky deaky heavy cycle or
Yeah.
heavy bleed, long cycle, short cycle, that happens. And that's totally cool. It's when you're noticing a persistent change. So if you notice maybe 2 or 3 cycles that have gone for 21 days, which is quite shorter than usual for you, or if you have 2 or 3 periods where you are really massively bleeding, then that is the time to go and get it checked out, and not to necessarily freak out if it's just a one-off. You're absolutely right. That's
Right.
good
So
to
it's
know.
like 2 or 3 times you'd say that you
Yep.
observe it, and then yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Or we're just on with bleeding though. The only situation outside of that is bleeding after intercourse. So I was saying before, we really should only be bleeding during menstruation. If you're bleeding premenstrually for a couple of days, that's fine and normal. If you're bleeding premenstrually for 2 weeks, that's too long. If you're bleeding for half a day at ovulation, again, totally normal. If you're bleeding after intercourse once, fine. Maybe it was very vigorous. Maybe it was your cervix was a little bit lower and a little bit more what a doctor would call friable and a little bit more fragile. But if you're noticing bleeding after intercourse each and every time you have sex, then that's something I would not wait 2 or 3 menstrual cycles for. That's something I would check out much sooner than that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Obviously, also coming back to, again, this being individual, are there any things that you can say, well, this is general in terms of if you want to support your cycle a little bit better, that can be emotional or that can be physical? Like, what kind of measures would you recommend that people take to just make sure that they have a healthy cycle or supported cycle? Or if we've had that one-off, where we were hardly bleeding or where we were bleeding like very heavily, like what can we sort of do to make sure that we then support ourselves and our bodies better?
Yeah, so general measures to support our regular healthy menstrual cycle really come down to all the sensible lifestyle factors that I know you, Mai, very, very much strongly do in your coaching.
Yeah.
And it really ultimately comes down to making sure you're adequately fed, that you've got good nutrition, that you are digesting your food and moving your bowels regularly, that you are really paying attention to rest and stress management, and that you're managing your exposure to maybe some chemicals around you. So there are some chemicals in our environment, endocrine disrupting chemicals, that interfere with our hormonal balance. So those are the sorts of things that you could start paying attention to. If you felt like things in your cycle were going awry and you thought, hang on a second, I need to pull my socks up a little bit in looking after my reproductive health, then if it's just stuff you want to do at home, make sure you're eating regularly. Food is our first medicine, obviously. Food is fundamental to everything else. And your body wants to be reassured that you're eating. Your brain wants to know that you are eating enough food and you are eating enough food regularly, that you have got the nutritional and the physical resources to be able to ovulate. By extension, biologically, be able to have a baby. But if the brain is picking up that you are not well fed enough, or you are not eating regularly enough, if you're going into a fasting space regularly, like it's just going to shut down ovulation or delay ovulation. So it's really important that you're nourishing your body with healthy food. And I know how much you believe in enjoying your food and not getting too caught up in what's good and bad. And I don't like that either. I'm really not into good food and bad food. But I am into eating sensibly, obviously. So, you do need to nourish your body with healthy sources of protein to maintain and make your hormones, to keep your blood sugar nice and stable. That might look like animal protein. It might look like vegetarian protein. There are plenty of healthy vegetarians all around the world, but it needs to be protein. Like, you need to be eating protein. And you know what? In spite of all the low carb and no carb diets, we really need to be we need to be eating carbohydrates. Our
Yeah.
ovaries, I love that nodding. Our ovaries want
No,
to
I'm like,
breathe.
seriously, I did that for a while, right?
Yeah,
Where this
yeah,
was actually part of my directions from my doctor.
yeah,
So
right.
back in the day, like 10 years ago, when I first
Yeah,
figured out that I had this hormonal imbalance, one, I went to a gynecologist who should have told me everything that you're telling me right now, but who
yeah,
didn't, who just yelled at me for, not wanting to take birth control pills, told me
yeah,
that I was breaking my body if I wasn't making sure that it was bleeding every month,
yeah,
even if it was like an artificial bleed from,
yeah,
birth control. And then at the same time, you know, they were like, okay, well, if you follow these, principles of dieting, then it was for me with my blood sugar levels, I had to have so much protein, but I could
yeah,
have no carbs. And I am telling you, for 6 months, I followed this diet and I
yeah,
was cold all the time.
yeah.
But also, my brain wasn't functioning properly and I
Yes.
wasn't happy. And where was my energy, right? Also, when we're
Yeah,
moving, because movement, it's a huge part of us,
yeah,
like, feeling well-being and being connected to our bodies. It's like breathing, right?
yeah.
So if we don't have carbohydrates, how will we have the energy to move? Like, it's so
That's
important to, obviously, to listen to your body. It's like you say, I truly believe in, enjoy your food, eat
yeah,
intuitively, but make sure that you have the support, you're providing the support that your body needs to have like that stable blood sugar, to make sure that
yeah,
at every, meal you have some form of protein, to,
yeah,
make sure that it's the kind of protein that's right for your body, that you enjoy, that isn't, too much for you.
yeah,
But just truly listen to it. But sure, for sure, carbohydrates is,
yeah.
it's a part of, something that we need for energy. But there
Yeah,
are
I mean,
a ton of
our
different
brain
things.
builds on
Yeah.
it. Our brain, our ovaries,
Yes.
our body, we can't move without it. You're so right. Why? Anyway,
Yeah.
carbs.
Carbs.
Love
Go for carbs,
carbs.
but find the right kind of carbs. There's also a
Yeah,
difference at what kind of carbs that you choose. If wheat isn't great for you, maybe pasta isn't the best thing for
yeah,
you. But make sure that you then look into slow carbs, such as things from seeds and nuts, and
yeah,
balance stuff out. I think this is, yeah, that's so important. But everything, like, in listening to what you're saying here, for me, it sounds like body love in terms of trust, because I feel
yeah,
like what so many of us have learned, and this is very much part of what I'm trying to work with my clients on, is that
Mhm.
we're so used to determining everything in our mind. Whether we move, it can be for gratification in the mind rather than well-being in the body. The
Yeah,
same with food. So um, we have so many different things that we just adhere to, so many habits that we adhere to that aren't necessarily nourishing for us, where it's just like, well, I have to do this, or I can't eat cake, or I can't, all of these
yeah,
restrictions and limitations and rules that we put up onto ourselves. Where it's like, if we never listen to the body, if we don't move with the body, if we don't flow with the body or breathe into it or listen to it, where if we're just allowing the mind to steer everything, right? How will the body know that it can trust us? Like, we
exactly.
need to make sure that we use our mind to make the right kind of choices for
Yeah,
ourselves and for our body, for sure. But there's a huge part of this whole thing with, like, having a
mhm,
healthy cycle, but also just like having a body that flows and that lives
yeah,
well, which is
yeah,
very much about the body knowing that it can trust us, that the body will know that the decisions that we make in our mind will support it, will be
yeah.
like, okay, I'm tired, so rather than feeding it coffee, maybe we'll have a power nap. It's these kinds
Exactly
of
right.
things.
And that's the thing is we have to trust, as much as our body is trying to trust the mind that we're going to do the right thing, we have to trust that our body is always speaking to us.
Mm.
And so it is really important to listen. If we're talking in terms of diet, like we just have been, if you are repeatedly, regularly eating something that constantly makes you feel sick, that's your body's way of speaking to you.
Mm.
And you might do well then to have a break from that food, work with someone to restore gut function and digestive fire so we can enjoy that food again later down the track. You know, if you are experiencing period pain, that is your body's way of speaking to you. Listen to your body. So I think, Maya, that is such a good point. If you're tired, maybe don't have a coffee and rest instead. We have this responsibility to these amazing bodies that walk us around this earth to pay attention to its language, which are the symptoms. You know, the symptoms are our body's way of speaking to us.
For sure. Yeah. Actually, I'd like to dive into as well a little bit about, you know, the cycles, not just in terms of our inner cycle, but also the different cycles within our period. Because when it comes to also listening to the body, one of the things that I've learned is that there's a winter at one point, then there's a spring, and then there's a summer and stuff like this. So in terms of that body love and that trust and stuff, because I feel, I don't know about you, but for me and for most of the people that I know, what we've learned is that, you know, productivity is that's kind of like equals our self-worth kind of thing, where we're part of, you know, that body trust that we're talking about here. It's also very much about listening to the signals that we're getting from our bodies, not just reading, well, what is our cycle saying, but actually being like, oh, am I tired today, or do I have a lot of energy for this? Can you speak into the cycles a little bit, and the seasons, I would say, kind of the cycle?
Yeah, definitely. So there is this perspective or way of looking at our menstrual cycle, that the phases in our menstrual cycle mirror the seasons that occur in nature. And, you know, I love this idea because we live in a world full of cycles. You know, we have the day-night cycle, the life cycle, the lunar cycle. But we exist as part of these cycles, not outside of them, but within them and as part of them. And women are cyclical beings. So once we reach puberty, the thing to remember is our body is constantly striving to keep us in cycle. You know, our body is always working. Those hormones are shifting every single day to keep us in cycle. And when we're not in cycle, sometimes it's because we're pregnant and we're becoming part of that whole life cycle again. So we exist within these cycles, and we do have this mirror of this cycle of the seasons happening inside of us. So in this way of thinking, our bleed or our periods would be our inner winter. So I think we can all relate to that. You know, we get our periods, we do want to slow down. We do want to be that animal that hibernates in her cave. Our energy slows down, our focus becomes inward and a little bit more dreamy in nature. So this is a very good opportunity to let ourselves slow down and to focus on rest. And what I suggest to women is, what this really means is saying no to commitments or engagements or people that aren't in alignment with how we're feeling during this winter time. If you're in a position to, you could consider working from home or independently if you wanted to, because we've got this inward focus, this downward sort of energy. And getting to bed early, it's exactly like you said, Mai. There's this focus on productivity, which is fine. You know, I love to be productive, but it's not anti being productive to rest. You can only be productive when you are well rested. They sort of go, dare I say, they go hand in hand.
I mean, they complement one another for sure. Like rest and sleep actually is the foundation for everything, right? So unless we sleep, it's like, you know, that is like a pill rather than a pill, but this is something you can do to make everything function better, right? To make sure that you prioritize that sleep. And we usually do anything to avoid it, right?
Yeah, and I think when we're in this inner winter phase, when we're in our menstruation, if you're not used to practicing going to bed early and really nourishing your body with rest, maybe this is a good phase in your cycle to have a go at that. So in terms of physiologically what's happening in our bodies, we're shedding that uterine lining, we're letting go, we're bleeding. So I always like to think in our inner winter, what else can we let go of? We're in flow, we're in this menstrual flow. How else can we create flow and ease for ourselves over this next cycle? So if you're a planner, this inner winter, this time of menstruation, is a really great time to create lists or mind maps, to plan out your cycle. What can you dream into being? And if you're not a planner, like if you're not the sort of person that's going to bed early, maybe this is the phase that you try it out. Maybe this is the phase that you sit down and you have a go at planning out the cycle, dreaming into being what you might like to see over the rest of the cycle. So your inner winter, for me, I don't know about you, Mai, is about letting go, about rest and reconnect to self.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's also, I mean, in my human design, I'm cave, and this definitely comes up in me at that point. But I'm also a little bit more, dare I say, needy. Like, I just kind of need hugs, from my partner and stuff. Can you hold me a little bit more? And like these kinds of things. And he knows now by now. It's like, oh, okay, it's that time, and he brings me flowers.
Yeah.
It's so cute.
Yeah.
Where it's like, great, okay, so you're really being nourished. And for me, I think it's actually been a journey of, even within that relationship, not just in the relationship with myself, but actually asking the people around me to support me the way that I actually would like at that point. And I know that for many people, it can also be really difficult to say no to engagements, or, there are so many times where we don't speak the truth, but rather we be like, okay, sure, I'll go, even if you're not really feeling it. Or I'm really practicing in my relationships, have done for years, to establish relationships where, I can only be sure of your yes when you dare say no to me. So whenever a friend of mine says no, I don't feel like it, I celebrate that. I celebrate her for saying that, because it makes it so much easier for me to express that need. So I feel like that's a really beautiful thing as well. So it's within our relationship to ourselves, but sometimes that can also be a practice in making sure that other people know this, like, or in making sure that we ask for what we need from other people. And that can be, that can be vulnerable. That can be, like where you need a little bit of courage, I feel.
Yeah, I agree. And I really like what you just said there as well, about if a friend says no to you, how to celebrate that, actually, because that's what we would want ourselves if we have the courage to say no. We are taught from really young beings to say yes, 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 and make people happy. And it does take courage to say no. So when someone else establishes boundaries, we should celebrate them. And we should feel our own way into creating our own boundaries. But once we have this inner winter, and we've had our hibernation, we've had our hugs and our cuddles, and we've nourished ourselves with mapping out the next month and soup and cacao and all that stuff, we move into our follicular phase. And, this is that phase in our menstrual cycle I was talking about before, where those follicles and the ovaries are starting to grow. They are blossoming, they are getting ready for ovulation. It's also a time in our menstrual cycle where that uterine lining, it's been shed in our inner winter. And now it's starting to plump up again and thicken up again and get ready for renewal. So those ovaries are getting ready, the lining's getting ready. And I always love thinking about our ovaries and thinking about our eggs as like we as women are walking around with the universe inside us. Our ovaries have got the potential of life itself. They are the very seat of creation and of creativity, and they are sitting inside us, right now. Now, in this follicular phase, that's what we're feeling. We're harnessing this blooming and blossoming creativity. Our energy is starting to climb. We're starting to feel a little bit more productive. You know, this is our inner spring now. You know, we've got estrogen being made. It's making us want to focus more, and it's a productive time. It's a great time for social connection. It's a great time for meetings and collaboration. This is our inner spring. So our follicles are blossoming. How can we blossom in this phase? So that's sort of the key energetic take home for me in our spring phase, in this follicular phase, is what ideas and plans can we get sprouting? What can blossom? This is about creativity and focus and motivation, renewal.
Yeah.
Our inner spring, which
coming back
is
to
exciting.
life.
Yeah, exactly. Coming back to life. And then, you know, then in our body, we are heading into ovulation, which is our inner summer. And of those maturing follicles in our ovaries, one of those follicles I was talking about earlier has become the lead or the dominant follicle. It is the biggest, it is the juiciest, it is the ripest, it is the shiniest, it is the most sparkly follicle that ever there was. And then it gets ovulated. And all that creative potential that I was talking about before, you know, that is out there. It's out now. So that's the energy of summer. It is this high vibe, high energy, highly joyful phase. Excuse me. Lots of women will feel an increase in their libido at this stage. Like, this is the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. This is the flower coming into full bloom. This is the party. So capitalize on this by scheduling your social activities during ovulation. This is the time for more high intensity exercise, not when you're feeling that inward nature of menstruation. You know, now is the time. So, you know, sort of key thoughts, actions and emotions around this time would be confidence and expression and pleasure and sensuality and playfulness. You know, this is a high energy time. Do you ever notice that as well, Mai?
I do. I mean,
Yeah.
I think after working with you, especially, and as my cycle has stabilized so much more, I actually see these faces so much clearer. And I've literally had moments in the last few months where I'm like, I must be in this phase right now because I'm cheerful, I'm joyful, I'm just like go, 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 go. I've got all this energy, I'm bubbly, I'm just it's just and you know, I can truly feel that in a very new sense. And that's been a really extra beautiful thing for me to have, you know, experienced, is that I've never had, like, you know, regular periods and stuff. And after these things have just really settled, it's just so much more clear and so much more evident. And it feels like, for me, within my body, having a more nourished cycle now, is that my body just feels overall more supported, even in the times when I am, you know, in that restful kind of like winter period. I still just have, there's a different sense, and I kind of want to say that I feel it in my spine, because I do. It's just like the energy just flows so much clearer, and what I need in different moments is just so much clearer for me. And there's just a way of owning my body, owning my needs, owning whatever it feels like, without there being like this, it's like a dragging energy or like a slow kind of thing, where it feels like I've been truly set free, especially around the times of, you know, springtime and summer, where it's just like go, 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 go. It just feels so much more alive.
Yeah. And so then with that feeling though, of, you know, this high energy time where you are feeling more alive, loving that about you, you know, in the universe, what goes up must come down. And that's not to say that being up or being down is better than the other, but we've had this high time of spring and summer, our follicular phase and our ovulation. We do then move into our luteal phase, our post-ovulation phase, our inner autumn. And we do start to slow down again and look inward again as we're preparing for our next winter. And in our body, that's what's happening biologically too. Our body is preparing for the next period. As we approach menstruation, estrogen and progesterone are dropping off. And that's when we might start to experience some premenstrual symptoms. So I almost like to think of it as a time where we might start second guessing ourselves. You know, that full summer confidence starts to falter a little bit. And we might start to feel a little bit less resilient in the face of criticism, the criticism of others or our own inner critic. And so we do start to move inwards again. So for me, there is this challenge represented by our inner autumn, where we are in a position to allow ourselves to feel more vulnerable, but also to fortify oneself against, to steel oneself against inner criticism or outward criticism. And I always imagine it like we have a tree that's losing its leaves in autumn, but its branches and its roots become strong. And I really resonated with what you just said, Mai, about you feeling it in your spine. You know, like that core of yourself, we need to remain strong and to fortify ourselves, and we need to be resourceful and be prepared to protect our energy in the next coming winter. So this inner autumn is a unique time as well, where keywords might be vulnerability and assertiveness. It might be self-protection, you know. So each phase is definitely different. Each phase, I think, gives us an opportunity to draw on different strengths that we might not feel are as obvious at other parts of our menstrual cycle. It's almost like with looking at our menstrual cycle in view of the seasons, it's like we're working with our body instead of feeling like our body is working against us. Yeah. Does that make sense?
For sure. I mean, I don't know. Well, that's been my experience of this, you know, going deeper into my own cycle, working with you, becoming more aware, is that it allows me to flow better. Yeah. It allows me to nourish my body better, to listen better for its signals, which means that I'm nourishing myself from a new place, you know. It's very much a co-creation, I would say, between my mind, the choices that I make, and then my body being nourished and feeling supported. And I think for me, that just strengthens me. So it strengthens me. So when I have this level of trust within myself, I trust my body, I trust the signals of the body, because now I've actually done stuff to make sure that my body is giving me the right kind of signals, right? It's like if we have issues with our blood sugar, then we can't trust that our body is going to tell us when it needs sugar at the right times, right? But if our body is nourished and our body is asking for sugar, you can trust that, oh, well, that's the right choice for me. And at the same time, when the body then signals, well, what is it that I need at this moment? When we make the choices in our minds and we actually take the actions that our body is asking for, then that level of trust is just strengthened. So even as you say, if we imagine it as, you know, the leaves falling off a big tree, there's like, I kind of want to say I'm less apologetic about what it is that I need and who I am. And rather than it being about me having to put up a fence against others, it's simply a matter of owning and honoring myself, knowing that, well, I need to look after myself first. I need to put on my own oxygen mask. There's no point in me going out, or there's no point in me going out to dinner if I'm more susceptible to taking on other people's energies and stuff, and I'm not even having a good time. Then it's better that I prioritize in this moment. Who do I want to spend time with? Who can I relax around? Who will make sure that I feel great in their company? Or, you know, who can I provide something so I feel great about myself? Making those kinds of choices for myself, rather than it being about going into fight mode, or, you know, putting myself into situations where I feel like I have to put on my armor before going out. No, this is just like a matter of, well, what kind of engagements and plans and dates do I put up on my, like, for myself in this moment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's fabulous. And I also would like to mention while you and I resonate with this sort of paradigm of looking at our menstrual cycle as mirroring the seasons, there are some women that aren't menstruating at all, or infrequently, and they still might like to connect to the cycles of nature. So if someone's got polycystic ovarian syndrome, or they're going through fertility treatment, or they've had a hysterectomy, or they're moving into menopause, their inner cycle might not be there, but it might feel meaningful to those women, if they want to keep anchored in a regular cycle, to have an awareness around the moon, and the lunar cycle. So I think that we are fundamentally cyclical creatures, and that for some of us, it might not be an opportune moment to focus on our inner cycle and our inner resources, but we might want to tap into the lunar cycle instead. So
I
that's
love the
just
fact that you include these women, because I think that this is so important. Here we are sitting here talking about a natural cycle. I've had my own issues with all kinds of stuff, and it hormonally, and it's so easy to feel excluded, or to feel weird, or I think it's so important that you just throw in everybody, like all women, whether or not they have this cycle working for them or not, or if they're in a certain phase of it. I think that's so important. But actually, getting into that, I would actually love if you could speak into natural contraceptives as well. Like women that are going through fertility treatment, but actually, I kind of want to take it to a step before that, because this is one of the reasons why I came to see you. I didn't want to be in a situation, because I'm almost like mid-30s, and I do have hormonal imbalances that are raging through my system. So rather than me being like, okay, in X amount of years, when I'm ready to actually have a baby, that's the time when I begin kind of to make sure that, okay, or I end up in fertility treatment. I kind of want to make sure that I've done everything to nourish my cycle beforehand, to get myself ready to when the moment comes. So are there things in terms of like natural contraceptives, or things that you can do to look after your cycle to make sure that it is getting ready, or it is getting nourished to get to that point of conceiving a child?
Yeah, I think that getting to know your cycle is the number one thing.
Yeah.
Like it really comes down to understanding what your menstrual cycle is telling you, and then learning to decipher that into, do I use this information to achieve a conception? Or do I use this information to avoid conceiving? So that's where natural contraception comes in. It comes into understanding what your menstrual cycle is telling you with regards to when your fertile window is, and then you can make decisions around that. And this idea of understanding what your menstrual cycle is telling you well before you're ready to conceive is really important, because as you know, it doesn't happen overnight. So you might decide you're ready to have a baby tomorrow, but your body might not be ready to meet you there yet. So learning about your cycle beforehand, in terms of maybe natural contraception, if that feels right for you, is really useful. So excuse me, with natural contraception, what that ultimately involves is you charting or noting down your oral temperature. So you'll take your temperature every morning, and also observing your cervical mucus or your vaginal discharge every single day. And those two lots of information will tell you when your fertile time and infertile times of your menstrual cycle are. So with your daily cervical mucus, if you're checking that cervical mucus every single day throughout your whole menstrual cycle, what you'll notice is after your menstruation, after your periods, your mucus might be absent or scanty. But as you move closer towards ovulation, you'll start to notice it becomes a little bit drier, tacky, a bit pasty, a bit thicker, a bit creamier, and eventually it will become quite profuse, quite wet, quite stretchy, like egg white. And that is considered very fertile mucus. So you can sort of imagine, if you're looking at that wet, stretchy, egg white mucus, you can imagine sperm swimming through that. you know. But if you imagine the mucus you get earlier in the cycle that's dry or tacky or pasty, you know, obviously you can't imagine sperm swimming through that. And it is a literal observation. If you look at both of those different types of mucus under a microscope, that wet and fertile mucus almost has what look like swimming lanes in it to help sperm get to where they need to go. And they also have a different composition of sugars and proteins to nourish sperm. You know, our cervical mucus is there to let us know we're about to ovulate. It will be peak and wet and stretchy and like egg white right before ovulation, but it also wants to nourish and support sperm get to where they need to go. So your mucus lets you know when you're about to ovulate. Now, when you're taking your temperature every morning, so as soon as you wake up, you take your temperature, what you'll see is as soon as ovulation occurs, you'll see a rise in temperature. So remember, we had that follicle, the egg's gone. We now have this empty follicle, the corpus luteum, secreting progesterone. Progesterone immediately sends our body temperature rising because it wants to support an early pregnancy. So if you're taking your temperature every day as part of a natural contraceptive method, you will very clearly see a rise in temperature and sustained high temperatures, which essentially mean ovulation is over. You've moved into your post-ovulation infertile time of your menstrual cycle. So the mucus lets you know when you're about to ovulate. So as soon as that mucus is wet in nature, avoid having unprotected intercourse. And the temperature confirms that you have ovulated, ovulation's over, you've moved into your infertile time, you could start having unprotected intercourse then. So that's the sort of basics of natural contraception. I would encourage anyone who's looking to use it as a contraceptive method to seek guidance and support to make sure that you've got the concepts down. I always suggest to women to chart for at least 3 months while using a backup barrier method, again, just to be super cool that you've got all the concepts down. And the more time that you give yourself to practice with understanding what your mucus is telling you and seeing that you're getting that rise in temperature, the more you understand your cycle, the more confident you can be in using this method for contraception. But I also do want to just let anybody know who's listening is that this is a very effective form of contraception, but the efficacy for natural contraception like this is based on abstinence during that fertile period, during ovulation. It's not based on the withdrawal method because that is considered a risky form of contraception. It's really based on using a condom or abstaining.
Right. The thing is, I kind of wish that everything you've told me today was something that was part of, you know, coming of age. Some of us, and I know that not everybody had this, but some of us have gone to school where we actually learned about, you know, procreation. But we learned nothing about these things, about understanding our cycles, about reading it, about how supporting it. And I think that this is so important. So I think the last question I would love to dive into with you is, from your perspective, how can we help women from a young age appreciate our bleed more, and how can we be better at leaning into the benefits of this time rather than just seeing it as an inconvenience? Because I know for me, since there was nothing, no information about everything that you've just told me, what I saw was just a time that was really annoying, where you kind of had to, like, you know, hide your tampons, and you had to, you know, there was all of these different things where there are so many benefits to this. And like you and I spoke about earlier, it's very much about nourishing your body and, you know, feeling like, yes, this is a time where my body is actually, it's healthy, everything is functioning the way that it, you know, it's meant to. How can we as women nourish ourselves better? How can we appreciate it more? But also, how can we teach our youngers to do the same? Because I know that also you are a trained celebration day facilitator. I would love to know what that entails and kind of what that does, because I mean, I'm not a mother yet, but you know, if I were to have girls, I would want to support them this way. It's not
Yeah.
just about me having this information. It's also about making sure that in their cycle, as they're growing up, maybe they can teach their friends, because nobody's going to teach them this at school. But if
Yeah.
I teach my friends, then maybe they'll teach their daughters as well, so that we celebrate this in a different way. And maybe we can even teach the men or the boys
Yes.
turning into men how to
Yeah.
celebrate this too as a natural part of life. This is life giving, right? So yeah, let's hear about the celebration day, what that means and how.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we want to frame menstruation positively, it ultimately does come down to us advocating for that. And I have to say, we model that
Yes.
to our children, to our nieces, to our friends. Now, I don't look at it as being a badge of honor to talk about how much period pain you're in or how much premenstrual symptom discomfort you have, because those symptoms might be common, but they're not normal. And we need to learn that. We need to learn that we don't have to suck it up. We don't have to soldier on. Women need to learn about what a healthy menstrual cycle is so that they can seek help when they need it. And our girls need to see that as well. We are modeling our behavior and our attitudes around menstruation to a younger generation. So the more that we can model thoughts and behaviors of self-care and nourishment, and of course that our periods are a good thing, then that's what they'll pick up on. And things are changing without a doubt. There are outdated cultural beliefs around menstruation all over the world, unfortunately. Not everyone has a great time of menstruation, but things are changing, and there is a cultural shift occurring. With the celebration days for girls, you know, it's a really fun day talking about what it means ultimately to get your periods, and how it does mean that you do have this amazing creative potential to create life should you want to, should that be part of your plan. And it is about normalizing menstruation because it is hidden away and it is stigmatized and we don't talk about it. So it's really about like throwing back the curtains, clearing the cobwebs, shining light on menstruation and storytelling and framing it in a really positive way. And one of the first activities I do in a celebration day for girls is I get the girls to write down the age they were when they got their first period, or for them to guess how old they think they'll be when they get their first period. I get them to guess how old they'll be when they go into menopause. And then they write down how many children that they would like to have. And then we do a little bit of maths and we work out how many periods they can expect to have in their life. And it is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Oh my
So my
God.
message, I know. And so my message to the girls at this point is, you know, girls, if we're going to have this many periods, we may as well make friends with them. You know, we may as well learn about them and understand them and sit with them, because you're going to get quite a few of them. And so that's where it begins. And that's where you and I and women we talk to play a really important role in speaking honestly about periods as well, not sugarcoating it. Some women do get period pain, but also modeling that it's okay to seek help when things aren't normal, to let our children, our daughters, our nieces know what normal is, and to celebrate getting their periods, to really acknowledge it as an important rite of passage. I mean, imagine if every single girl had a celebration day. You know, it would definitely frame things in a little bit of a different way than a secret, quiet talk in a classroom or in the bathroom the first time they get a period. You know, if we had a great big party, you know,
I mean,
that's
I
sort of
love
changes
this.
the way we look at it.
No, but it's just everything that you're saying here is very much about embracing it rather than rejecting
Yeah.
it. And what I really loved about what you said right now is about the fact you might as well make peace with it, because it's going to come again and again and again.
And again
That's
and
just
again.
that's even like, if not even on an emotional level, it's like a logical thing. Like if
Yeah.
every month you experience something that you reject about yourself, about your body,
Yes.
about your situation of being a woman,
Yeah.
you are struggling against, you know, naturalness. You're
Entirely.
struggling against yourself. You're struggling against your body. For everything you just say is about, well, you know, I might not like it, but
Yeah.
I should nourish this relationship, because
Yeah.
it is a relationship. This is something that comes to visit me every single month when I
Yeah.
bleed. So I think that's a beautiful thing, but it also sounds like a lot of fun to be like, okay, well,
Yeah.
how many, but you put this into such a beautiful perspective that even not until me hearing you speak and say this now, I hadn't done.
Yeah.
So it's also a matter of accepting, right?
Yeah.
I am a woman, so if I don't want to celebrate the fact that I have this, then I might just begin by accepting it and making
Yeah.
peace with it, and then little by little maybe we can start to embrace it more until we finally reach the point of celebrating it. And I know for myself, I rejected this so strongly. I think that I thought that it was such an inconvenience. Thought that it was so annoying, and just something to hide away.
Yeah.
And especially also because we grew up in this culture where there's so much focus on being self-sufficient and not needing anybody and not being weak, and you need to be independent, right? So just even going into a state where it's like, oh, well, maybe I am more vulnerable at this time,
Mm. Mm.
I sure as hell rejected that. I am not weak. I am not going to be weaker. I like, this is not a time of being ill. I was like, no, it's not a time of being ill. But what is it? What does it mean to nourish yourself? What does it actually mean to live in this body and have this beautiful relationship to it? So I think that just by you saying this, if any woman could just rephrase what, you know, her periods the way that you just did for me, if we could do that to our little ones, or
Yeah.
if we as women would do that, that's a very beautiful thing. Yeah.
Look, it is a beautiful thing, but there is a flip side to that. And obviously I believe hugely in period positivity, and part of my life's work is framing menstruation positively. But you know, there are some women that have a genuinely horrible time of menstruation, and you know, they're listening to you and I now, Mai. We're talking about our high vibe inner summers, and they are throwing the podcast across the room, you
My
know, because
goodness.
these women that I have full compassion
Yeah.
for, with particularly with endometriosis, you know, they are laughing at us talking about period positivity, because these women have had multiple surgeries. They are missing work. They are missing social activities. Their intimate relationships are impacted. Their fertility is impacted. They are in pain, 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 pain. You know, or if you are a woman struggling with infertility, you know, every period is a bit of a sad reminder that you're not pregnant.
Yeah.
You know, so, and that's devastating. That is literally devastating.
Yes.
So I don't want to diminish or dismiss the experiences of those women either, because for some women their periods make them feel like their body isn't working at all. And those are the women, if any of you are listening, that I really want to work with, because I would love to play a role in changing that experience if I could, and if they could.
And this is why you're here. This is why I
Yeah.
desperately wanted to have this conversation with you, because not only is this about, you know, changing the stories and the framework around this from when you were little, but it's also about, because I know for myself, had I not read that book, Claudia
Yeah.
Welch, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing not just this woman into my life, but this way of thinking. You know, she's a Western trained doctor, but she's, you know, worked within Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine for like 30 years. So she has this beautiful combination. And had I not heard of her,
Yeah.
I would have just adhered to these Western principles that I was told about when I came there with my hormonal imbalance, which was, you know, I wasn't being presented with any options. Like,
Yeah.
had I not known, had I not read that book, I never would have known that I could have gotten this support for my cycle. So
Yeah.
I really wanted to put this forward so that people know about you. But not only that, I also just want to note here that until we accept something, we cannot change it.
Yeah.
So whether you are struggling with infertility, whether you're struggling with painful endometriosis, we need to accept it before we can actually look at, well, what is bringing up these things. And that's a huge part of it as well, because if we are in Western science only, I feel like what we're doing is we're rejecting all the symptoms by just getting medication and stuff. But what we really need when it comes to healing is we need to dive in closer. We need to embrace it. We need to figure out, well, what is it that's in here? And as painful as it is, life serves us these pains so that we can ask the right questions. We need to listen inwards. We need to inquire inwards. And we cannot do this alone. So we need somebody like you, for instance, to help us ask the right questions. Ask the right questions with our cycle, with our emotional well-being, with our supporting our body and how we live. We need to inquire inwards, but until somebody teaches us what kind of questions to address inwards, there's no way to change it. There's no way to start. But Jacintha, I want to leave with this. I just want to say thank you so much for being here, for showing up on this call with me, because I know that we put ourselves out there, and that can be also very vulnerable, right? We show up and we want to serve, but we also need to put ourselves out there. So thank you for putting yourself out there. If you would, I would love to invite you and everybody else who's listening to us to just close your eyes and just take a big breath in as we inhale, and then a big exhale. Just maybe taking a moment to allow all of that wisdom and energy and everything from that situation and conversation to just land. And then as we're coming back, I just want to say that, or remind us all that our body, that's our vessel. Our body, that's the house that we live in. And body love, everything that you've stated here as well, body love is really about meeting the body. It's about honoring it and nourishing it, and really inquiring inwards to figure out how we as individuals can support that body. Body love is never about numbing or suppressing or tuning out the inner voice of the body. So I really want to thank you here for helping me and everybody else meet our body differently, and for teaching us how to attune and align with our bodies in a way that helps us flow with it rather than seek to control it. And I just want to thank you, Jacintha, for all of the beautiful work that you show up and you do for this world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mai. Thank you so much for those kind words. And thank you for inviting me to chat with you about periods, because you do know they're one of my favorite subjects. So thank you.